And I once again request all of you to remain muted, both your audio and video. Once Ramya is done with her talk and presentation, we will be having a question and answer session and discussions. At that point of time, depending on the kind of response you have, you can come online and make your poses before Ramya. So welcome, Ramya. Without further ado, I will straight away begin with your introduction. And so what I know about Ramya is actually a very, she may not like my saying so, but she's a photographer of repute. She has a very impressive, I dare say, a very impressive CV. She is actually from Ooty's Nilgiri's own Light and Life Academy, where she did her course on photography, and later she went on to do several other courses, important of them being the Santa Fe workshops. She was a part of it some time back, and then she's also an alumni of the Parsons Schools of Design in New York. And she has been quite active in the media, as in she, on the commercial front, she has collaborated with several brands, boutique lifestyle brands and hospitality brands, Taj Hotels and Forest Essentials being the important ones of repute and note. And her work, photographs have also appeared in journals and magazines like Fontanista Travel, Michelin Guides, Vogue, and several other coffee table books and photography journals. And so one of the reasons, I and others in entire Nilgiris thought of asking Ramya to come and talk on this very important theme, of indigenous communities of Nilgiris. I use the word indigenous communities, with a reason. I could have, people generally use the word tribals to identify such communities, but it's a very loaded word, I dare say. So one of the reasons why I thought, okay, using the word indigenous communities of Nilgiris would be more appropriate. So the reason why Ramya has been working and studying the communities of the Nilgiris for the last 10 years and more. And last year, or maybe a year before the last, it was in 2018. Hello, Ramya, you there?
I'm here. I think you are breaking up a little.
Am I? So, are you able to hear me, see me?
Yeah.
What I was asking was, I was not too sure. Your book was released in 2018 end, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So that book titled The Soul of Nilgiris. It was 10 years in the making, and she spent considerable amount of time and energy, going around the Nilgiris, the countryside, and meeting the communities, the Todas, the Irulas, the Kurumbas, and she has been very active with those communities now, and her book is a testimony to her effort and study and understanding. A beautifully illustrated book, and an extremely, I would say, a very readable book with evocative prose. And she brings in, a lot of her scholarship into her work, and does so in a way that reaches to many more people. A lot of complex ideas are, put together in a more comprehensible and a readable form. And that's what makes, in my view, apart from the quality of the book, the production value of the book, I think it's also the way she weaves the narrative on the uniqueness of these communities in the hills, and in a very accessible prose. So I once again thank Ramya Reddy for accepting our invitation, our offer to come over and share her ideas and work with us. And before I hand over the mantle to Ramya, I just wanted to give some kind of a context and a framework. Um, uh, and I mean, Ramya, I'm sure will elaborate further on this. I think it's important to, I mean, at least for me, I don't know how many others here share my sentiment and my view, but I think as I was reading Ramya's book, one thing that emerged was that it's not, the indigenous communities, the tribals are not exotica. They are not some museum relics, and we try to understand them or reach out to them, out of some idle curiosity. I think what the communities here in the Nilgiris, and I'm sure the indigenous communities elsewhere in India and across the world, they represent an epistemology. It's the knowledge systems which we seem to have. People today, majority of us, in the epoch of modernity, we seem to have totally, lost track of those knowledge systems. We grossly misunderstand them. We brand them as primitive, mythical, and superstitious. But then I think this is where Ramya's talk, I would imagine, would enlighten us more. I mean, how misplaced such our larger, very commonsensical understanding of indigenous communities and tribals are. So I think this is where Ramya's talk would deeply enlighten us and inform us further, and also kind of shows a trajectory of, particularly for Intact, to how do we collaborate with them to, to bring, I mean, how do I put it, I mean, how exactly can Intact really work with them in that sense, and in mutual interest. So I just leave now the mantle to Ramya with these few words. So Ramya, you there? You're able to hear us and
Yes,
read us loud and clear. So
yes, absolutely.
if others
Can you hear
are
me?
having any issues, yeah, I can. I hope
Okay.
others are also able to hear.
So,
if there are issues, just leave a message. Yeah, thank you, Ramya. Yeah, carry on.
thank you. So I'm just going to start the screen share.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Krishna, for your warm and effusive welcome, and for the nice things you've said about my work, writing, and the book, pictures. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today on a Sunday morning when you should be brunching and enjoying a drink somewhere. Thank you for coming here and joining me, and to come listen to me talk about my beloved Nilgiris and the indigenous people here. I'm really happy and honored to be able to share a little bit about my 10-year long year journey in the Nilgiris and her indigenous people as I created my book Soul of the Nilgiris. Today I'd like to start with a little poem blessing that was written for this book by a dear friend of mine, Indumala, who is well-known poet, and she hails from the Barya community and a very dear friend of mine. And Auntie, many of you might be even familiar with her, considering a lot of you must be, I'm assuming a lot of you are logging in from the Nilgiris, so I'm sure many of you know her. So here's what she wrote for the book. Beautiful blue mountains, may your peaks rise proudly into the sky for all time to come. May Mother Earth always nurture you. May your shoulders be verdant. May your rivers flow full. May your well springs of wisdom never run dry. May your ancestors protect you. May your children live in harmony. And may your winds weave a canopy of blessings above you. So there's something really special about the Nilgiris that has drawn me there from childhood. One way or the other, we kept going back, a little weekend here, a weekend there, or a holiday here, or holiday there. My parents are both mountain lovers, and so invariably we were holidaying or weekending in some mountain, some hill station or the other. Eventually, I came back to do my photography course at the Light and Life Academy, um, and that was like coming a full circle. I ended up there. Kind of like it felt like a past life connection unraveling. And it was then that towards the completion of the course that I took a keener interest in documenting not just the landscape but also the people, and started to exploring everything about the landscape, right from the local ecology to the culture of the indigenous people in the Nilgiris. So, given that most of you who are joining are from the Nilgiris, I'm going to spare you this ordeal of having you put up, for you to have to put up with a slide that wants to tell you the coordinates of where you are currently situated. And but having said that, since we may have friends dialing in from other places, and new to the region, I will move on with a very quick intro to this geographical orientation. Nilgiris, or the Blue Mountain Range, is located in the Western Ghats of Tamil Nadu in southern India. The principal rivers of southern India are born in this area in the endemic shola forests here. In September 1986, the UNESCO constituted the Nilgiris ecosystem and its surrounding environments as the Nilgiris Biosphere Reserve. Among the crashing rapids and quiet pools thrives an exceptional biodiversity of endemic species of flora, fauna. The Kurunji, as all of you will know, with its purple blue hue flowers, blossoms only once in 12 years in the upper slopes of the Nilgiris. So naturally, I was enchanted by a land so magical, and as I mentioned just a little earlier, a photo series began towards the completion of my photography course in Light and Life. But little did I know that the trajectory of this project would take a completely different turn as I furthered my explorations. And this started to happen when I started to actively meet the indigenous communities. And I was deeply inspired by meeting these people, each with their own culture, truths, and experiences of the landscape. They were tied to the Nilgiris deeply, and until not so long ago, to each other in a symbiosis and a barter system that was unique to the Nilgiris. I must mention that, as all of you are well aware, there are massive bodies of anthropological works about the region authored by many doyens of Nilgiri anthropology. There's plenty of this, as you all know, but for me, this work has been coursing through the Nilgiris and the indigenous lands, and telling these stories has been about telling the stories of the indigenous people, and the stories of the landscape. I'm sorry, just 1 second.
Any issue, Ramya?
No, I think there's some glitch with the sharing. It's not letting me move forward. So okay. It's just frozen the screen. Is it something from your end?
No, we are good. This happens. Now it is.
Okay, now it is. Okay.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I was just talking about the fact that there is plenty of this tremendous amount of anthropological work out there that has been authored by many domains of Nilgiri anthropology. But for me, this work has been telling the stories of the indigenous people and land I loved through the worldviews of the indigenous people. And I wanted to also present the landscape as they saw it. So, as I went along, I started to meet people doing work of immense essence in the Nilgiris, researchers, anthropologists, grassroots organizations like Keystone Foundation, um, and so on. And they all, in turn, took interest in my project in time and introduced me to elders from different communities. And I must say, uh, these introductions were hard earned. So, and I learned from these elders as I met them gradually that the old ways were not simply cultural constructs, but they served a more important purpose in that they enabled man to live harmoniously with nature. But building trust with the elders took time, as one would expect. The elders, some of the elders would ask me if I, like many had done before me, would take whatever I wanted and just leave. Um, I knew at that point that this project would be much more than me, much more than a mere documentation, much more than a mere photo series. This project had to be about the community, and so it began. Through the microcosm of Nilgiris, I could see that we were losing sight of the nuances of a culture in its relationship to an entire ecosystem, of the subtle but vital ways in which we connected to nature and through nature with ourselves. And with hope of telling these stories and in a way that they would have resonance to something much more universal, I felt the need to capture whatever I could. And that is the soul of the Nilgiris. And so I began to explore the mountains with my Adivasi friends. And almost every time we hiked around the sholas, um, one of them would invariably point out to a grove or a peak or piece of sky and launch into a folk tale. Initially, I thought these were some fairy tales or moral stories, but only going forward, uh, I learned that these were real stories to the communities, real stories of Genesis, um, as real and layered as the bed of leaves that I was walking on or the peaks that we were scaling. For instance, personifying a tree as a grandfather meant we would never have the heart to bring an axe to it. Not only did these folktales evoke an urge to protect so alive and personable a forest, but they also created a humbling mystique about nature. You can never know all, they seem to say. In the millennia old mountains, a human was but a flailing infant. To us sweet city dwellers, these stories, there are plenty of these stories in the book, and plenty more in my head still that I have to um, put down on paper. They sit as voice notes on my phone still. In any case, to us city dwellers, these may come across as warm fantasies on woven on cold nights or silly superstitions. But what such a perspective might not account for is the role of human imagination in everything we have today. As Krishna was talking before, uh, how, you know, um, right from how we perceive ourselves to currency or the disembodied idea of rationality or to the idea of man as a supreme being on earth. In the world of Adivasis, however, Kurumbas, Suras, Irulas, the forest and its paths are not different from their own sons and mothers. Over the years, a Toda lady I met and developed a very close bond with was the regal, silver-haired, wise and funny 70-year-old Mutsin. Mutsin is the name. Muthsin. Mut meaning pearl in Toda, Sin meaning gold, of pearl and gold. And it was with her that I saw, experienced rather, the real Toda landscape. Um, there's once that she took me to a hamlet of great sanctity, a migratory hamlet. A lot of you would be familiar that the Toda, the pastoral um, folk of the Nilgiri indigenous communities, one of the most ancient perhaps. Mutsen belonged to the Toda community. And okay, coming back to what I was talking about, she took me to this hamlet of great sanctity, the migratory hamlet called Newln. And it's a seasonal migratory hamlet and far removed from the reaches of civilization. As pastoralists, the Todas observed a migratory lifestyle until just even a few decades ago. During the dry season between March and May, families migrated with their buffaloes to marked southwestern areas of the plateau where the grass was still green and vacated before the onset of southwest monsoon. It was through these experiences, and particular through this visit with Mutsin, visiting Newln with her family, that affirmed the divine in the land as they saw it. And it was that poignant an experience for me in the process of making this book. Often when I would visit her, Mutsin would be seated under a tree or outside her home, sewing nature-inspired motifs onto off-white cotton fabric, creating ubiquitous Toda shawls and the like. And most of you won't need any introduction to the Putkuli or the Toda shawl. Mutsin was also the person who inspired the embroidered spine for the book Soul of the Nilgiris. She brought in some of her nieces that you see here, Pudusin and Pudumali there. And they in turn brought in a group of women artisans, and all of these ladies came together and worked painstakingly for over 2 years to create the spines of this book, a rather complicated project in itself, from ideation to execution. I remember, speaking of the embroidery and her sewing and everything, I remember she was once at her doorstep sewing a really intricate, ornate putkuli. When I asked her about it, she just brought it and she draped it around me and said with a big happy smile that this was her funerary shawl. And that was supposed to answer my question as to why it was so beautiful. So she said that had to be the most beautiful garment. And while I could at that time see, I see it, I understand it better now, but at that time I tried to be pragmatic and understand her, and I always gently dismissed these ruminations about afterlife. But she was always so graceful and expansive about it, and which I understood after she passed on, which was a year and 2 months from that day when she draped that shawl around me. In fact, in October 7th, on October 7th, it would be 1 year since she passed on. So that was Mutsin, and that was where a lot of my learnings, on-ground learnings of the soulful learnings of the Toda people and the Tura landscape came from. Yes, I learned a lot from the books and studied and interviewed and everything, but a lot of my learnings came from the people themselves, from friendships, from real relationships, from mm, uh, silences, from exchanging lunches, dinners. And so a lot of whatever has come, I mean, a lot of whatever I've written in the book is mostly first-hand experience. So in June in June 2015, I get a call from Subramani from Alu Kurumba community. He said their clan was undertaking a honey collecting expedition and that I could join them the very next day. I mean the very next day. So, but you know, a couple of months prior to this, Subramani had warned me about the nature of these expeditions. He said he had said that the members picked specific times based on their um, native science and intuition, and that I had to be ready because I had been badgering him for months before that about wanting to join them for one of these expeditions. And so it kind of came through, but this was the catch. I was in Bangalore. I was on another project. I was shooting somewhere. I had to just drop everything. But the question was, I'm a single woman. How am I going to make that trip to Vellarakumbai? My husband is not down, and my friends are busy. And in any case, long story short, a very dear friend of mine, John, who was actually recovering from a heart surgery 1 month into it. He just offered to come, and I took him up on it. And by next afternoon, we were in Kotagiri for the expedition. It was an arduous 7-hour hike to get to the base of the cliffs of Vellarakumbai, which the men would scale and suspend from impossible heights on ladders made from tree vines to retrieve the honey. So as you can see in this bad iPhone video, I'll let this play on loop a little bit while I tell you what's going on here. I thought I was going to stay put at the base camp. This is after the 7-hour trek I was talking about. If I have to talk about 7-hour trek, then we have to do another Zoom call or a Zoom webinar because that was an experience in itself. So after getting here 7 hours later or so later, I thought I was going to stay put at the base of the cliff, not come to this point, the video that you're seeing. But Subramani insisted. He said I should just go, and there was not much more to scale. So I thought, okay, what the hell, and just went on with them. And little did I know that we had to hack our way to the top. There was no path. We had to hunker down through the caves, and while they lit smokers and would very nonchalantly tell me that don't worry, this is just in case a bear shows up. So this was the path to the top, and we finally emerged to an incredible commotion of smoke and bee haze, and this is exactly what you're seeing. I'm somewhere below that. And the bees were flitting about so angrily, and you can see here that the bees that are coming close, whatever you see in the foreground, hitting my camera lens. These are rock bees that we're talking about, the size of grapes. Now when I look back at it, I would just do this all over again in the blink of an eye. But at that time, I was getting acquainted to the ways of this landscape, the people. So all of this was a lot more foreign. So it was much more pronounced in how overwhelming it was. But yeah, though it was wonderful, rigorous adventure. All of that is there. But uh, when I look back, it's a little different. And therefore it's wonderful to be sharing it in this way here. So anyway, coming back to this badly made iPhone video of the bees flitting about. So they're hitting my camera lens, and at some point, before I arrived to this point, I was stuck in that haze, and all I could hear was Subramani's voice, and he said, "Trust the bees, and they will not harm you." And I just crossed over. I couldn't do anything else. I had to get onto the other side. And to me, that exchange with Subramani was like a shorthand for the quote by Robert Browning, where he says, "Look deep into nature and you will understand everything better." I did what Subramani asked me to do, and I emerged onto the other side, unscathed and free from all fear. On the right side, you see a depiction of a similar scene by Subramani's brother Krishna, who is a Kurumba folk painter. So the thing is, Kurumba's sense of invincibility about the bees, it comes from a remarkable confidence in coexistence. That the bees will not harm them because the Kurumbas take great care to see that the bees are not harmed. They do not want to provoke the bees to sting. It was, after all, the bees that would die after stinging. This is Krishna again, making his, that was Krishna again in the process of crushing his pigments with forest materials and making that painting that you just saw. These are some of his materials, all from the forest, from resins, barks, leaves. So Krishna created, depicting this honey sequence that you all just saw, Krishna created an edition of 100 bookmarks that we gave away at a fundraising event a year or so back. A few months later, I went back to Vellarakombay to meet Subramani and Krishna's aunt, Janaki Amma, a healer of repute, a midwife, and now a very dear friend of mine. Unlike the previous time, this time I hiked alone, and all the while wondering if I would make it, considering the sense of direction. My sense of direction is not exactly astute. Somehow I made it. Janaki Amma's so when I did make it to Janaki Amma's house, what was waiting for me was her signature hand ground coffee that she had sweetened with jaggery. And while I was pouring over this and enjoying this coffee and just the comfort of seeing her and the exhilaration of having reached there after that arduous climb. It's actually not such a difficult trek. It's just that I hadn't done it alone before. So it was exhilarating to be on the other side and to be hugging her. And then she brings this coffee out. And she tells me very casually that this is how she goes to work twice a week, by catching a bus from the village. And from there, she had to walk to a few other hamlets. Janaki Amma was working as a reporter for an Adivasi newspaper that is run by Keystone Foundation. So she would take this bus thrice a week and go to these different villages, to these different areas, and then from there she would trek to these different villages and aggregate all the news and come back to base camp, which is Keystone in Kotagiri, and report. So to me, Janaki Amma, this woman has always represented a force of nature with a healing touch, so comforting. She, in our time together, and even now actually, I was with her a couple of weeks back. It's hard to get her to reveal too much about her healing, and not that I want to learn or anything, but just out of curiosity. It's while I can't do that, and I understandably so. I mean, why should she? She did give me some cures for common colds and fevers and so on. But what I learned a lot more from her process was her philosophies on her approaches to native healing, and her the things and how she had harnessed her learnings from her father, who I learned was one of the greatest healers that there ever was in the Kurumba community. And to the Alu Kurumbas, the practice of native medicine and ethnobotany was handed down through families and to only those who sought it, and learned entirely by practice and on field. So eventually, even though she still does not talk about, she does not go into the details. Eventually, she did placate me with some promises of hair oil and all that. But this is something that she maintained and that has stayed with me. And though she said this in Tamil, I hope I have translated to the best of my capacity into English. Only those who seek are bestowed with the knowledge, because healing works only if one is connected to it deeply. The medicines must be activated with intent. They will not work on their own. This requires the healer to work with intuition and perseverance. I want to show you all a little video. This is not my video, but this is courtesy Keystone Foundation, made by somebody, a team from there. This is a glimpse into a day of Janaki Amma.
So if people are wondering about the audio doesn't, or even the video doesn't do too well on Zoom. So kindly bear with that.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, but not the audio.
Okay, I'm going to restart this.
No, usually Zoom has a hitch with videos and audio. So
is this okay?
No. The audio doesn't work too well on Zoom. If you're playing a video,
Okay,
at least from my experience.
Should I just skip the video or what?
No, you can still, the subtitles are helping.
Okay.
Ramya. So
Okay.
it's good enough. I just wanted to let people get a bit anxious and wonder what's happening. So that's why I had to interject.
Okay. I'll just leave it.
Yeah. Please continue. Yeah.
Okay. So that was Janaki Amma, courtesy, video courtesy Keystone Foundation. I think it was made by Ritwik from Keystone Foundation. Okay, so coming back to the slideshow. So my walks and hikes around the Nilgiris took me to a lot of Badaga Hattis, the Badaga hamlets. Badagas, as all of you know, need no introduction, but for those who are out of the Nilgiris, Badagas are the agrarians and the largest and the most prosperous of the indigenous groups of the Nilgiris. Much of what I learned about the much of what I learned about the Badaga culture came through its ballads, the folk tales that I was so curious about. Oral literature is one of the most formidable legacies that the Badagas inherited from their ancestors. For centuries, bards in these remote ranges rendered stories through epic ballads on diversity of nature and people in the region. And so I sought these ancient hattis set in remote valleys where traces of this legacy could be found. Under the mentorship of foremost Badaga scholar, Reverend Philip Mully, I wonder if Reverend Mully is on the other side listening to me talk. As I was here last week talking, listening to his. So Reverend, if you're here, hi. Okay. So Reverend, I must say that Reverend was key in my research process. He mentored me, he humored me, he challenged me, and he, apart from taking me to all these places and guiding me, so Reverend was very, very key to the making and to the soul of the Nilgiris as you see it. So coming back to the Badaga landscape, with Reverend's help, I explored some of the ballads and the oral literature of the Badagas. This was something that drew me in about the Badaga culture. So this is what I wanted to explore as a theme for my exploration for Soul of the Nilgiris. And so we hunted down translators who could work with us and render original translations for some centuries old ballads. And we managed to do it over time. It was all because of Reverend. And Reverend himself helped me translate many of these. And there was Reverend Devraj, who's Reverend Mully's friend, who did a lot of research and translating for us. So in any case, of the many pieces of the Badaga orature, the excerpts of some of which you will find in my project, one that deeply affected me was the Funeral Litany, a catalog, which is a catalog of 1,300 sins. And this is uttered during the death rites, absolving the deceased of his sins. This is a little excerpt from the 1,300 lines. If he estranged his brother, it is a sin. If he altered the contours of a field, it is a sin. If he snatched away a growing plant, it is a sin. If he butchered a bush of Strobilanthus, it is a sin. If he plucked young plants and threw them under the scorching sun, it is a sin. If he used cow to plow the field, it is a sin. If he spoke evil of others' domains, it is a sin. If he failed to relieve the fatigued, it is a sin. You can see why it is this profound and why it affected me so deeply. I mean, there's so many of these ballads that you will find that are like this, but this one stood out because from the smallest thing, like actually from sabotaging familial bonds to inflicting smallest harm on the smallest creature. Every manner of wrongdoing is uttered with the same passion and enthusiasm, which is what makes this catalog of sins not just an unparalleled rite of passage of absolving sins of the dead, but an eloquent mirror inquiring into the deeds of the living. So, um, yeah, this is why that it stayed with me. But if we have covered a few more as a part of the project, and they're quite profound in themselves, and taking you, each ballad taking you through one or the other Nilgiris landscape. So that is a part of the ballad exploration that I enjoyed, because I felt like I was also traversing different Nilgiri landscapes under Reverend's mentorship, of course. So moving from the Badga landscape, this is Rajeshwari. In late 2016, I visited a witty, hearty, renowned Kota community artisan potter at Sholur Kukul near Ooty. It turned out that I was not just meeting potters, but a community that was at the heart of Nilgiris. The Kotas, a brief introduction, functioned as artisans and musicians of the Blue Hills. Pottery, however, was and is a woman's domain. Rajeshwari told me that she learned pottery from her mother and grandmothers, and her daughters and granddaughters from her. However, it did not have to, you did not have to specifically learn like that. You could learn from any woman in your community who was willing to pass on her knowledge to you. The Kota people in the Nilgiris see the presence of God in the soil and the sky, but earth to them is female. So those who traditionally sculpt this earth are also Kota women. During annual festival of their cardinal deities, Kota women go to the old marshes, often skirting the cavernous shola forests, to ceremonially extract the clay. They will then transform into pots and earthenware. So typically the women work with two types of clay mixed in equal proportions. The black clay procured from the old sacred swamps near the forests, and the brown clay found near the villages. And they're usually collected in a ritual ceremony during their annual deity festival. And the clay is drawn in large lumps, divided into smaller portions, molded into conical shapes that you're seeing now, and then carried back into the village in a procession. Then it's dried, pounded, made into smaller pieces, then cleaned and sprinkled with water, and then kneaded into a mass. Typically, the Kota potters, the ladies, they work in pairs. The chief potter molds the clay while the other operates a hand lever to spin the wheel. It takes 4 hands really to make every piece of Kota pottery. It would have to, the pots then have to dry in the shade before being paddled into their full shape, and then burnished with stones to smoothen the surfaces. And then they would eventually be fired to remove all the moisture. Typically, the Kota pots have a beautiful, warm, dark gray surface. And interestingly, that's because of that coloring is because of the local millet husk that is used to fire them. The Kotas also functioned as chief artisans and musicians of the Blue Hills. They made leather goods, pottery, carpentry, smithing. They were into all of these. They had fashioned most of the silver jewelry other indigenous people in the Nilgiris wore, and this is why when I see these false claims across Uti, Kunur, and all these touristy places about Toda jewelry and all that, it's unnerving because there is no such thing as Toda jewelry. It was, yeah, they may have been some basic silver pieces that each community had, but it was the Kotas who crafted those beautiful jewels that people perhaps refer to. It was the Kotas that crafted them even for other communities. So, in exchange for all their artisanship, the Kotas got dairy supplies from the Todas, grain from the Badagas, and occasionally forest products from the Kurumbas and the Irulas. The Kotas are and still are skilled musicians. As official songsters, they initiated many ceremonies. It was customary for the musical ensemble to arrive first at a Badaga funeral, for instance. The proceedings began only after they performed their drumming and percussion and incantations. And this was how it always was between communities of the Todas. Musical procession preceded the events. The Kotas possess an impeccable sense of rhythm. The dancers take care to align steps and spins with drumming. I was entranced by the cadence of the sounds and the chanting that fused with the dancers' repetitive rhythmic movements. To the Kotas, song, music, and dance have the power not only to speak, but also to implicate their physical and moral strength. Songs, instruments, and dance serve as conduits for communication between Kotas and their deities, explains Richard Wolff, an eminent Kota historian.
Oh, here the music would have really helped.
I know.
It's a kink in the Zoom app, so can't do much about it.
Yeah. Okay. Therefore, we'll just move on to the next. I visited Keystone Foundation in Kotagiri in December 2014 to meet Pratham Roy, the founder director, also one of my mentors. When he visited me to join his team, the very next day, they were going down there to an Irula settlement called Bangla Padigai to judge a cooking contest honoring the slow food movement, celebrating indigenous, locally sourced produce and home-style cooking. Pratham just said one thing, come hungry. And this is the first time I was meeting him, by the way. So the next day, we went back. Of course, we joined them. The hunter-gatherer Irulas of the Nilgiris are expert small farmers. They cultivate everything from ancient grains to vegetables introduced by British or on their sacred lands. Their traditional agricultural methods were naturally designed to efficiently and effectively use the available land systems, water, and soil nutrients to produce organic crops for both consumption and livelihood at different times of the year. So singling out a few dishes, my husband Rajesh also joined me on this expedition. And for both of us to single out a few dishes from the array of freshly prepared, delectable, impeccably seasoned dishes from locally sourced grains, roots, vegetables, and greens was no easy task. We both have traveled a lot, and we could somewhat understand the nuances of fine flavors and fresh produce and so on. this was really, really hard, this exercise. The yardstick that really helped to do this judging was with every kilometer a contestant traveled to source the ingredient, a point, we could deduct a couple of points. Even then it was not easy, because this was one of the most memorable meals that I have had in my life, and I'm sure Rajesh would say that too for himself. So that afternoon's farm to table meal, this farm to table meal that I'm sharing with you, was an exercise in not just eating locally, organically, but eating consciously, while making the effort to learn a little more about the food, learn a little more about the food we eat and where it comes from. Awareness itself can go a long, long way in supporting the indigenous farmer and clean, small, sustainable, small-scale farms. And that is how my relationship with Keystone Foundation also began, with this trip to Bangla Padigai and participating in this slow food festival activity. So I'll move from here, and so in this way, there's so many more stories and photographs and things that have been documented and put into this book. Maybe it'll be easier to read in there, or look at the pictures, because I believe I'm a better photographer and a writer than I am a speaker. In any case, I'll just say that stories, knowledgeable, and worldviews of indigenous people answer urgent questions about long-term sustenance. We can only begin to, if we want to do something about any of this, to preserve their cultures or anything in that regard, we can begin by opening ourselves up to other ways of living and alternative ways of seeing the world. Just opening ourselves up is enough to begin with. As anthropologist Wade Davis writes, when I say this, I'm quoting him in this regard, because I mean, this does not mean, when I say that we start opening up and and so on and so forth, I mean that we don't mimic what they are doing. But as Wade Davis puts it, we recognize that our way of thinking is just one of the many that emerged from one set of historical and cultural constructs. We must go beyond patronizing and exoticizing the indigenous people, which is how they are typically tribal communities. That is, I think Krishna started this talk with that, and I was I like that you made a mention of that, Krishna, about the use of the word tribal versus indigenous. Yeah, it's something I'm also very sensitive about. We are all tribal in that sense, so indigenous and people who have known that piece of earth much more than anybody else has, is how I see it. So we need to go beyond patronizing and exoticizing them, is how they are usually treated, and it's more so coming from people the likes of us, the likes of people from other communities, because we have the power to preserve this indigenous culture and the ancient wisdom, and this really would be a gift to ourselves and our children.
Yeah, true.
And anyway, I'm coming to an end of this. This is a line from one of the chapters that has stayed with me. I mean, I like it. Of the many things I tried to write, the natural world is a powerful teacher when one listens, as the Adivasis have for thousands of years. They have learned, and we should from them, that the beauty of the earth is not in its use, but in sustenance. And this is what every one of my Adivasi elders stands for. And I think it is time to take it forward. So I will conclude with that on that note.
Okay, Ramya, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, so that was excellent. That was wonderful, Ramya. It was like an immersive experience actually in about less than an hour. Taking us through so many layers of the theme, the indigenous community, the different communities in Nilgiris, the Kurumbas, the Todas, the Badagas, the Kotas, Itulas. And I would imagine you have just kind of scratched the surface. Here, the book is certainly a lot more. It has a lot more to offer, and the book itself, I would imagine, is just an entry point to take us.
Yeah, absolutely. It will always be an entry point. I think I have only scratched the surface, and you're so right about that. It will always remain that way unless I produce 5 or 6 more volumes or something,
Yeah. And I seriously and sincerely wish you do, and do that soon. So that was lovely, Ramya, and I'm sure, like you said, there are so many other aspects to it. Here we are just giving a kind of an introduction. This all the topics over the last 3 weeks that different people have spoken. We started off with Dr. P.J. Vasantan. He's a master of the colonial, particularly the colonial period of the Nilgiris. And then we had Reverend Mali talking about the churches, and today we have you talking about the indigenous communities. So all the three were basically we were just opening a window, and this was not just for the people here in Nilgiris, like you mentioned in the beginning. A lot of us here from Nilgiris, we have lived here, and a lot of these may not really sound new. But then, under the times that we are living in, there are restrictions. But then what happens is these online portals, meeting apps and portals, they kind of open up other possibilities too. And that was one of the reasons, I thought, okay, yes, of course, we have Intact Nilgiris is mandated to work with the communities here. But then a lot of things about Nilgiris also needs greater exposure and understanding beyond Nilgiris. So, so all these talks in that sense were very introductory. Over the next in year 2 and more, Intact, we would like to do such seminars of greater depth and greater and on like a webinar for running over 2-3 days, stuff like that, but having more scholars and members from the community here participating. That is because outreach and documentation, outreach and education is one of the core agendas for Intact Nilgiris. So Intact elsewhere, anywhere, apart from research and intervention. So Ramya, there are a few questions here.
Are you able to see me?
Yeah, I'm able to see you.
Okay, I cannot see. I'm just going to. I'm not able to see you, Krishna.
I don't know. I'm able to see you clear, able to hear you clearly. I have enabled my video and my audio. You're able to hear me, right?
I am. I cannot see.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's good enough. So, Ramya, there are a few questions.
Yeah.
I'll just try to read them out. Just one sec. Yeah, and so some straight away a compliment from one Prabhu. The Nilgiris are found no better storyteller than you. That was beautiful. And so then we also have Professor Susan Vishwanathan from JNU here with us. And she has a question. She says, if you can describe the 7-hour trek to the bee hunters enclave, which involves scaling the rock, maybe something more, which you did mention, maybe something more she would like to hear from you.
Is there anything specific you'd like to know? Because there's so many parts to it.
Okay, I'll do one thing. I'll ask Professor Susan to come online. Professor Susan, you're there?
Yes, I'm here, and I'm so dazzled by what you did, because I think it's very, very hard to do what you have done.
Thank
I'm just
you.
very curious how you managed.
Thank you. Is there something specific that you'd like to know, Professor Susan?
Please call me Susan, everybody.
Okay,
So
Susan.
to you, Ramya, is the courage that you had, and your friend accompanied you. So I think it's impossible for many of us as anthropologists to actually engage with the difficulties of the passage, the travel that goes into collecting data. So sometimes we do depend on others. So it's not armchair anthropology. We do what we can do, and particularly as elders, we would never attempt to compete with younger scholars. But I admire what you've done, and I'm really curious about how you did that 7-hour trek.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So, can you hear me, Susan?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, okay. So, you were asking me about the honey collecting expedition. So,
Yeah. Ramya?
yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
Yeah, so you have something to say?
No, I was asking Susan, which part of it would you like me to talk about? The ritual part of it, or just going to the cliffs? Or there's so many parts to it. So the overall
7 hours.
experience was difficult. Was something I did not expect. Though Subramani had given me a heads up about the fact that it would. I knew it would be unexpected in many ways, but I wasn't prepared for it. Yeah, it was difficult. It was, and now when I look back, I could do it in a heartbeat. Yeah.
Okay, Professor Susan, does that response satisfy you for the moment?
I'm sure we're bound to meet, and I can follow this question up at some point.
Sure.
Yeah,
No,
sure,
yeah,
you
sure.
can.
Anytime. You can shoot me a mail also. Yeah, anytime.
If you can just leave your email ID, Ramya, in the chat box for everyone. I think people can directly get in touch with you. And there is another Prabhu actually. I'm not too sure whether this Prabhu is a he or a she. I apologize. So Prabhu is asking, the Nilgiris have so many tribes with their distinct tradition. Has there been a blurring of these differences in recent history? Ramya?
That's a very good question, actually. Nobody's ever asked me that. Has there been a blurring? But I don't think there's been a blurring as much as there has been a more divisive thing at play, I think it has actually segregated the communities further away from one another. The hierarchies, the uh, our social systems and everything. I think if anything, there has been no blurring.
Okay.
I don't know if
Okay,
you
I
mean
suppose
blurring in the sense, when you say blurring, I don't know if you mean unifying. No.
I suppose what my own is Prabhu there. Can you?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
Yeah, Prabhu. Yeah, you can shoot the question. Yeah, there you are. Yeah.
Yeah. So my simple thing was that if you have so many tribes, the Erulas, the Badagas, the Kotas, the Kurumbas, everybody. The point is, as they get more modernized, the Nilgiris, there tend to be more interaction, and in some cases, maybe for example, the healing that Janaki Amma has been so blessed with. Is there a possibility that these differences are not protected, rather than they're kind of diluted, so that instead of remaining masters of what they've been doing for hundreds and thousands of years, is it now coming more like, we do the same thing as they, and they do the same thing as us? The paintings get mixed up, the lifestyles get mixed up. So isn't that a kind of a sad situation, or is it, like you said, the segregation is actually a fact of life now? They become more proud about who they are as
No, I
individual
didn't. I
tribes.
didn't say that segregation is making them proud. I'm just
Huh.
saying it's. Your question was
They're able to
no.
protect the individual traditions, right? They are able to protect them even today.
To some extent, but when you say blurring, do you mean between the communities, or do you mean
Not in a
more?
negative way, only in
Okay.
in way of their practices and their traditions, and
I don't think so. I don't
okay,
think
that's
so.
good
I
to know.
don't.
Yeah,
I don't.
that's good
I
to
don't
know.
think so.
Okay.
No. What I'm saying is, in my opinion, I don't think it's blurring. These connections between the communities are blurring in a way that is good for them.
Okay.
You were talking about preservation, right, Prabhu?
Yes, I
Yeah,
was aware.
yeah. So individually within their own sects and communities, yes,
Okay, I got that.
but I don't see this inter-community thing happening. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
For me, in fact, that's a good thing. I just want to tell you. I mean, in a sense that it allows us to explore the richness of each tribe as it was
Yeah.
maybe decades ago. So that's a good thing. Anyway, thank you. That answers my question. Thank you, Krishna.
Okay. If there are any other questions, we can take it up. This thing, Ramya, I personally, had one more point to
Questions,
make.
Irfan?
Hello? Hello, Ramya, can you
Samantha,
hear me?
I thought Samantha was saying something.
No, there was a question from Narasimha asking
Yeah.
whether you had any interaction with the younger generation from these communities and their points of view on artisanal skills and traditions.
That is a whole discussion by itself. Yeah, I've interacted with a lot of them. I think it's. What would you like to know, Narasimha? So, I mean, broadly, if you want a broad brushed answer, I can say this. They're all interested in their customs, traditions. They want to take their artisanship forward. They want to learn from their parents, their ancestors, whatever. But they do not have the appropriate opportunities to do so. So those of us who are, who should be doing that sort of thinking to create those opportunities for them. So they do not have those opportunities. So hence they all are forced to migrate to cities, towns, and whatever, and even resort to working on as labor in places and so on. But as much as they have this awareness, to harness this is a whole different thing. And
yeah, I think the question also is on the preservation of these skills and traditions, right? I mean, is this going to disappear sooner than we anticipate?
I don't think it's going to disappear sooner than we anticipate. But I think we should be a part of the solution.
I noticed there was a lot of outletting of this craft to Tamil women from the plays. So, would you corroborate that? I mean, the sense that tradition can be passed on through other actors without being judgmental about it.
Could you say that again, Susan?
That there is outletting or subletting of craft work and embroidery, particularly to Tamil women from plays, Tamil women.
Oh yeah, yeah. Absolutely, there's that, yeah.
And there seems to be a glitch from my end. Samantha, there was another question from Kalyani Menon. I'm not able to access the chat box from here. If you can just, I remember seeing something and for some reason my touch screen is not responding. Sam, you there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there was in the chat box.
Yeah, Kalyani is asking, can you ask Ramya about how come she didn't cover Bikapati Month village on honey collection, and are we allowed to visit these places?
I spent a lot of time in Bikapati Month, but all the time I spent was with, if you're familiar with the place, Kutan, that family, one of the families there, Kutan and his wife, Pudusin, they were instrumental in making the embroidered spines for the book happen. So I was in Bikapati Month pretty often at Pudusin's house. But no, I did not go with Kutan on a honey collecting expedition. I did go and see their the sacred temple with him, but no, I didn't go on the honey collecting. But if you're asking me, is there a way to go and see this with them? You should ask them. The Todas and the Kurumbas are the best judges of who can go and who can't go. So, yeah.
And there is Mr. Vedakumar Manikonda. He has put his hand up and he would like to ask you something, Ramya. Yeah.
Yeah. This is Vedakumar from Hyderabad. And is there anything coordination done with Delhi headquarters intangible division on this kind of research work?
Mr. Vedakumar, that is a question for us, INTACH. So just in another few minutes, Geeta Srinivasan will talk about INTACH. Okay. Can you just bear with us?
Yeah, but now so that it can be input. And these books can be available even in a library at INTACH Delhi. And also there is a store there where we pick up artifacts and things so that it can be more widely. People can see the study from really south, and it's a beautiful, wonderful place, the intangible heritage. And, and also some research can be done jointly so that it can be much more, can spread among the INTACH chapters in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vedakumar. Yeah. Sam, are there any other questions in the box, in the chat box? For some strange reason, I'm not able to so much with these meeting apps and their quirks.
No, Mr. Vedakumar has asked for the Amazon link. I've given it.
Yeah. Are there any other?
Just if that it can be provided by on this chat so that we can copy it and we can just.
I would want to interject here. Over Amazon, I would suggest that you purchase the books from Keystone Foundation, because all the profits from the sale of the book are going to Keystone Foundation. So otherwise, if you buy on Amazon, the books on Amazon have been put up by a bookshop who's stocking my books in Chennai. So if you can buy the books directly from the Last Forest website, it will go to Keystone Foundation, which is where the funds are intended to go to.
Yes, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Ramya. Way to go. So if there are...
That's it, Krishna, on the chat box, unless anyone else has questions.
Yeah, okay. So I think we are also running out of time, and this is a
I see.
moment to bring in Geeta ma'am. Geeta ma'am, you're there?
There's a
Just
question
hold on. I
from
think.
Dhruvi Singh. She says, could you talk a little about the huts of the Todas? What materials do they use? And do they have religious significance? She says, I'm a second year student studying built environment studies.
Who's this?
Dhruvi Singh, she says, could you talk a little about the huts of the Todas? What materials do they use? And do they have a religious significance?
Yes,
Okay.
to all
Okay.
of the
Thanks.
above. Thanks, Dhruvi. Yes, to all of the above. But this is going to have to be an elaborate answer. So why don't you shoot me an email? If you're a research student, then you'd be better off with an in-depth answer, so which I can send on email.
Okay. Thank you, Dhruvi. Thank you, Susan, for.
I'll leave my email on the
Yeah.
chat. So you can shoot.
Yeah,
it to
please
me.
do.
I'm actually sending an email. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Geeta, you there? I would invite Geeta Srinivasan to propose the vote of thanks, and more importantly, also tell us something. There are like already a couple of queries about INTAC. So I think Geeta ma'am is the best person to talk about INTAC and the work that has transpired in the Nilgiris over the last 25 years and more with INTAC. Geeta ma'am? I don't know, I see her online, but I'm not too sure whether.
She's here.
Is there? You'll have to unmute yourself, ma'am. Yeah.
Can you
There
hear me?
Yeah.
Hi,
Can
Auntie.
I can't see you though. Can you see me?
Yeah,
We can see you. Yeah, we can
But
see
I
you.
can't see. Well, I only see you. I don't see myself. Anyway. So good morning. Can you
Hi,
hear
Auntie.
me?
Yes.
Yeah. In the last 2 weeks, we've had two scholars in the field, Dr. Vasantham and Reverend Mali, who spoke on the unique heritage in the Nilgiris, and their audio-visual presentations on the colonial inheritance and churches of our district were widely appreciated. Today, we've had the privilege of having Ramya Reddy speaking to us on the unique tribal and natural heritage of our marvelous district. In my stint as president at the Nilgiri Library, I had the proud privilege of being part of the book release of our iconic book, Soul of the Nilgiris. I would like to thank all our participants and our dynamic duo, Samantha and Krishna, who have brought us these 3 wonderful talks over these.
I think, Geeta ma'am, you're there? I think there's some problem with our network, I suspect. Kindly bear with us.
Serving this precious heritage. INTAC,
Yeah, Geeta,
can you hear me?
Geeta ma'am, yeah, we lost you for a few seconds.
Okay, I'll come a little closer than I think.
No, I
INTAC,
think that's.
now can you hear me? Now can
We can hear you. Yeah.
But you can't see me. Okay. INTAC's mission is to conserve heritage, and it's based on the belief that living in harmony with heritage enhances the quality of life. And it's the duty of every citizen of India as laid down in the Constitution. A membership organization, today INTAC is recognized as one of the world's largest heritage organizations with over 198 chapters across the country. One of the best ways always to promote awareness is through education. And what better than imparting training to our teachers training workshops. These workshops are held to motivate teachers to play a more effective role in sensitizing children about heritage and encouraging them to form heritage clubs. And some of the resource material, we work a lot with government and government-aided schools. Can you see this? Resource material?
Yes.
You can. These are some of the resource materials that are in Tamil for the teachers to conduct their heritage workshops. And we've also had competitions on heritage. My City, My Heritage, where a lot of students from government and government-aided schools have taken part, and many of our regional winners have been from our chapter. One of the iconic
Geeta ma'am, we have lost your audio.
Can you hear me? Are you losing my voice? Okay, Nilgiri Library. And we've had a Ooty Literary Festival as convener and managing trustee. We held a Ooty Literary Festival over the past 3 years, which unfortunately came to a halt this year due to COVID-19. We have done major restoration work at the library, and through INTACT, this iconic Gothic hall of the library was put to, with its flat-sit windows, was put to good use. And now I'm happy to say that it's a great cultural hub in the district. One of the projects that we did with the former collector Supriya Sahu was a renovation of the John Sullivan bungalow in Kanerimuku. And we also, INTACT was also part of the process of installing a bust of Sullivan on the 227th anniversary, along with the inauguration of Sullivan Park. Recently, we heard about the restoration of Stonehouse in the Government Arts College. And I was suggesting even last week, to commemorate Sullivan's, the best thing would be to really plant oak saplings all over the Nilgiris. I think Dr. Vasantham or one of them could help us. And there are indigenous oak trees, and if we get saplings, we could plant these at important places. One of the ideas mooted by INTACT, which was successfully implemented, was a conversion of Connemara House into the government museum. Originally, the principal Government Arts College was staying there, and it's a historic building because Lord Macaulay is supposed to have resided in the house during his stay in Ooty. We have also closely worked with Dr. Tarun Chabra, and we took part in the release of his iconic book, The Toda Landscape, a definitive work on the Toda tribe. And Tarun, over the years, we have helped him to restore some of the Toda temples and also help in Toda migration. We have also had a talk by Mr. Christopher Penn, author and historian from England. The subject was Ootacamund, the Nilgiris and its people, caught in the lens of A.T.W. Penn. Some years ago, we took part in an interactive cultural festival aptly called Rainbow. This was held at Lovedale, jointly hosted by All India Radio and the Light and Life Academy. All the tribal communities came in their traditional attire and showcased their culture. One of the landmark projects that I took part as convener INTACT was the Guinness World Record for trees, for tree planting, which was honored by Guinness with a certificate. And we've also had a seminar on eco-fragile systems. Apart from book releases, we have renowned historians like Dr. Chudamani Nandagopal, Padma Vibhushan, Dr. M.R. Srinivasan, and Dr. Sharda Srinivasan, who is a Padma Shri awardee. They have given very interesting talks at the Nilgiri Library, and all these talks have been sponsored by INTACT. Museums abroad are used to disseminate knowledge, but somehow in this country, we don't seem to place much importance on museums. As convener INTACT and trustee assembly rooms, we inaugurated the SM Cine Museum, which showcases the two 60-year-old Bayer projectors made in Germany, film reels, spools, and film rewinding table and other accessories of a large bygone area, and is a place to visit for cinema buffs. We have been in the forefront to declare the Nilgiri Mountain Railway as a World Heritage Site, and we have taken part in many of the preliminary meetings. And we have also prevented the demolition of the McIver Fern House and the district court. Lastly, you may ask, these are only some of the activities which we have done over the past 25 years. And to go into more detail would need a separate meeting. Maybe after COVID-19 is over, we would like to call a lot of you who are interested, and maybe we'll have a meeting and explain to you more in detail about all the activities that we have done for the past 25 years. Lastly, you may ask, why join INTAC as a life member? This is because we want an army of conscience keepers to join the fight for conserving heritage. You don't have to be an art historian or archaeologist or a scholar to join INTAC. You have to care for our district and our country. There's a strong need for all of us to come together, to pool our resources, to voice our concerns and preserve our precious district, because a heritage once lost is forever. It is like a species going extinct, it can never come back. The past 100 years, more historic monuments have been destroyed, more antiques stolen, more tangible and intangible heritage lost, and the environment destroyed than all the years of civilization or billions of years of evolution. Every day a piece of heritage is being destroyed and we watch it helplessly. Administrations come and go and statements are issued to the press, but nothing really happens at ground level. In India, unlike in the West, no real documentation or listing is done, and with no strong heritage act, the destruction is happening before our eyes. At this rate, our future generations will neither see nor enjoy the rich legacies which they should rightfully inherit. UK, with far less monuments, has far more listing than what we have in this country. As citizens, if we do not wake up now, it may be too late. Invaluable works are dumped in godowns without documentation and records. Nobody knows how many are damaged beyond repair. Ancient wood carvings are broken and burnt as firewood. Everywhere we are hearing of sandalwood trees, even in private properties, being cut and stolen. We cannot save the whole country, but we can at least save our district. We can help to preserve our historic heritage, to help in the process of documentation, and to help preserve both tangible and intangible heritage. Any organization is as strong as its membership, and I'd like you to strengthen our objectives. By joining INTAC as a life member, you can access varieties of resources and material, and you get a beautiful magazine, Virasat, every quarter. And of course, we have these various talks, which we hope to arrange more of them in the future. So join our chapter and help to conserve our beautiful district. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Geeta ma'am. That was very, very, very inspiring, and I think just your speech now, I think, should goad many of the members present today who graced Ramya Reddy's talk should seriously think of joining INTAC Nilgiris. And people who we are on Instagram too, INTAC at Nilgiris on Instagram. Kindly do follow our page, and that will help you keeping yourself informed about the events, the ideas that INTAC, we at INTAC in Nilgiris are working upon. So it's INTAC at Nilgiris on Instagram, and we are also on email, intacnilgiris@gmail.com. So kindly do get in touch with us for further, for membership and further collaborative work. And with this talk today, thanks again, Ramya, for joining us. And
thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Auntie. Thank you, Geeta Auntie, for having me.
Yeah, thanks. You're most welcome. And we would also, we have had these 3 talks today, and we'll be taking a break for some time. And please be on the lookout. We will be doing further activities in the days to come. And research, like I said, research, documentation, and intervention, these at different levels: tangible heritage, architectural heritage, cultural heritage, even ecological, natural heritage. So please be on the lookout. We will set the ball rolling with our activities and maybe post Dussehra. So thank you very much. Thanks to everyone who have taken the trouble to attend. And sorry, there have been some technical glitches. These apps and interfaces and connectivity are